Good evening and welcome to City Arts and Lectures. Thank you all for tuning in. We hope all are staying safe and steady. I'm Davia Nelson of the Kitchen Sisters. As many of you know, tonight we were scheduled to be in conversation with Dolores Huerta and Alice Waters live at the Sidney Goldstein Theater in San Francisco. But here we are instead in the Sidney Goldstein Theater of the Mind. We are all joined in an unprecedented moment in history, a moment of deep uncertainty and struggle. How communities will reshape themselves and be reshaped by powers from outside is what is on the table. What a mighty moment for this conversation to take place. Dolores Huerta and Alice Waters, legendary activists both, decade after decade, both women leading the charge for the rights of farm workers, farmers, the health of children, and the land, both making us conscious of the political, ethical, and delicious ramifications of what we eat. Women who feel a calling, driven, laser-focused, full of spirit and love, visions and demands. Mothers, commanders, dancers, both. Please join me in welcoming Alice and Dolores. Welcome, Dolores. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you.
Hello.
I wanted to take a moment and ask you both to describe where you're speaking from. Where are you sheltered in place? Dolores, you lead the way.
Well, I am sheltered with my daughter Lori, and my daughter Lori is very protective, and she's being very, very strict in terms of not having any visitors, but it's really good because she's able to help me with all of these wonderful Zoom calls and webinars and all of these virtual types of practices that we now have to engage in to be able to get to continue our work and to get our messages out to everybody. So
and what town?
I'm in Bakersfield, California, right here in the Central Valley. We're talking about our food, our farmers, and farmers markets. Well, guess what? This is where the food comes from.
Exactly. And Alice, where are you? Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm sheltered in place at my house in Berkeley, California, very happily with my daughter and her partner, Andrew. And we are not going out except to take a walk in the morning. And fortunately, people are putting food on my doorstep, food from our farmers, and I feel very, very lucky that I get to look out the window of my library and see my big redwood tree and my little herb garden.
So, along with keeping yourselves safe and your families safe, where is your beam focused right now? Who and what are you thinking about the most right now, given the moment we're in? Dolores, tell me about that.
Well, we were doing a lot of work on the census. We had 125 people canvassing, going door to door, and we had a good portion of our organizers also doing outreach to the community. And so we had to switch our door-to-door canvassing, and we're doing it all now, establishing phone trees to get into our hard-to-count communities because there has been a lot of terror and fear, especially in the immigrant community because of all of the attacks that they have received from the president. And so that was one of our big main focuses. We're also working on an End Child Poverty campaign, and we're asking people to send emails to Governor Newsom. I know he's been really wonderful and such a great leader, but one of the things that we're concerned about is that our undocumented community, many of them are farm workers, will not be recipients of the benefits that are going to be given out for people in this time of crisis. The farm workers are still working. They're part of our frontline defenders. And so we're asking the governor to include benefits for our undocumented population as part of any of the state benefits that are going to be granted to people during this crisis. And even though farm workers are working, you have couples where, because the kids are not in school, that one of the pair will have to stay home with the children, so they are going to be suffering a loss of income. And the other thing is that many of our children, the farm worker kids in our rural areas of California, guess what? They don't have access to the internet. They're supposed to be homeschooled. They don't have computers. They don't have tablets. So this crisis is hitting them very hard. So we're asking people to send an email to Governor Newsom and say, don't forget our undocumented immigrants right now, who are also going to be very hard hit by this crisis. So those are two of the main focuses. And then we're preparing for a virtual Dolores Huerta birthday. My 90th birthday is coming up on April 10th. And so we were planning to have some celebrations throughout the state, but we're not able to do that. So we will be having a virtual birthday party, but probably not till the end of April or the first part of May. But we'll get the word out to everybody to let them know.
I was noticing that Governor Jerry Brown, I think it was in 2015, had declared your birthday, April 10th, Dolores Huerta Day in the state of California. So we can all be celebrating that. And I also noticed that a year or two later, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, the strong state of Washington, also declared April 10th Dolores Huerta Day there as well. So
yeah, and then we've had the state of New Mexico also, our governor there, Governor Lujan, and also in Kansas, the governor of Kansas has also declared Dolores Huerta Day. So we have 4 days. But we'll be celebrating that, as I said, later on. And then we're also working on a capital campaign. We have a city block site with our local credit union, the South Help Credit Union, who also has branches up there in the Bay Area. And we're raising funds to build a building. We're going to have a Peace and Justice Cultural Center with an organizing institute to be able to have a child care center, an auditorium for performances, a museum also to kind of celebrate and give tribute to all of the immigrant farm workers that have made the Central Valley great. People who came from the Philippines, from Japan, from China, the Punjabs, and of course the Dust Bowl people that settled the Central Valley and have made the Central Valley, I should say the whole San Joaquin Valley, have made it the rich agricultural area that it is, that feeds not only California but many parts of the world.
Astounding. Where did you say that museum was going to be built?
In Bakersfield, California.
Oh, I love it. And Alice, where is your beam focused? Who and what is the major area of your thought and concern in the moment we're in?
Well, I have to say first that I think we should all give gifts to Dolores on her birthday for her foundation. Couldn't be a better moment in time, really. And my focus right now is on supporting the farm workers and the farmers and the ranchers who are taking care of the land for the future. These people are practicing regenerative organic agriculture and are addressing climate and our health. And so we're really trying to bring boxes of produce to the restaurant and distribute them. But we're also working in Stockton because the mayor of Stockton, Michael Tubbs, wants to have organic, local food for free in every one of the schools in Stockton. And so the Edible Schoolyard Project, which is now 25 years old, and we started it in Berkeley in a middle school and planted a garden and made a kitchen classroom, not to teach gardening or cooking per se, but to teach all the academic subjects. And so in the 3 years that these teenagers are there, they all fall in love with nature. And it's so beautiful to see that happening. Well, Mayor Tubbs wants that to happen, as well as a free school lunch for every child in all of the 55 schools. So what we're doing now is we're trying to get our network farmers that are close to Stockton. We're paying them to bring farm boxes to the schools and distribute them for free to the parents who need them when they pick up food for their children at lunchtime. So it's a big effort that I'm trying to make that will support this group of people. And it sort of reminds me of the Victory Garden movement that happened during World War II, that we were asked to grow food for ourselves as part of the war effort. And people planted thousands and thousands of gardens in their backyards or front yards, on post office land, on city property. And it's all disappeared. And now we have to come back and plant those places between the street and the sidewalk and the rooftops, and really grow food that is nourishing and I'm thinking of it also as great therapy right now. I was involved with a project at the San Francisco County Jail. It was called the Garden Project. And that's what got me excited about working in a school, because the inmates made this garden under the direction of Catherine Sneed. And she called me up and she said, "Alice, will you buy the produce that we're growing?" And I said, "Yes, of course I will." And she said, "Well, will you come to the jail and meet my students?" And I said, "Oh, Catherine, just send the produce, please. I'm afraid to go to the jail." And she said, "You must come." So I went. And she asked, tell Alice what's happening here. And one young guy stood up and he said, "This is my first day in the garden, but it's been the best day of my life." And I thought, oh my goodness, this is transformational. Working in a garden, growing food, offering it to others, it can change you. And I thought, well, if you can do it in a jail, you can do it in a school. And that was the beginning of the Edible Schoolyard Project. But the most important part, and we can never forget this, those farmers need a reliable buyer. A buyer. And what could be a better buyer than the public school system? And I have a feeling with our enlightened politicians in this state that could happen, that schools could support the farmers and the farm workers who take care of the land for the future.
That is so beautiful, because when we think as of food as our as you said, our therapy, our not only healing our bodies, but also healing our souls, and giving us also the type of mental healing that we need in our society. Because when one works in a garden with the putting your fingers in the dirt and just going back to the basic way of life, because that's, of course, as human beings, that is where we started. We didn't get our food out of the grocery store. We got it out of our yards. And there are many people in the world today that still continue to live that way. And unfortunately, in our society here in the United States, we've gotten away from that. So I think this is wonderful. And the fact that you can also, do this in jails and then do this in schools. And Alice, I hope that what you're doing, we can spread throughout the whole San Joaquin Valley and maybe throughout the California and throughout the world, throughout our United States, because it does, it covers so many bases. As I mentioned, food is healing and growing food is therapy for everybody. So thank you very much. You've always been such a pioneer throughout the years and showing us not only what kind of food we should eat, making sure our food is safe, but now going the next step is how to grow our food. Thank you.
Thank you. Because, every time I go into a store and I see grapes, I never can buy them unless I know exactly who grew them. And it's all because of you, that awareness of the food system. And it's so shocking, the industrial food system that has tried to take our values, has sort of distorted the connection between the people who are eating and the people who are growing the food. They are pretending that they are putting us together when in fact it's not true. So we need to know who our farmers are, who is growing food locally. We want to support them, and the best way, of course, is that farmers market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we need to really say when we buy our fruits, especially our grapes, to make sure that they're organic, because unfortunately over the decades, we have been having this ongoing fight with pesticides that are put on our food. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that it's over, that we've won, but we haven't, because they keep making new pesticides. And unfortunately, they're so lax in terms of, the safety of those pesticides. So our poison is still on our food. So I would just say to everybody out there, when you're buying your fruits and your vegetables, buy organic, because that's the only way that you can make sure that your food is safe to eat. We still have the highest cancer rate in the world, in the United States of America. Many of the pesticides and other types of chemicals that are put on our food are banned in other countries, like in Europe. But unfortunately, we still continue to use them here in the United States of America. In my own family, my son-in-law, his father died. He was sprayed pesticides. His young 15-year-old cousin died in McFarland, where they had this really, really high rate of cancers among children. And his mother now has cancer. These are a farmer family, and to think that 3 of them in the family, 2 of them passed away, 1 has cancer. And this is so true of so many of our families here in the San Joaquin Valley. So please support our organic farmers, and hopefully someday that we can all lobby to make sure that we put anything that has to do with chemicals on our food, that it goes through Health and Human Services. Take it out of the EPA, take it out of agriculture, because so many of these, like Phil Burton, the great Congressman Phil Burton used to say that he had more growers in his district there on Sanborn Street in San Francisco than there were in the valley, because we have this industrial farming that you referred to. And so many of the owners of corporate agriculture, they're not out there in the fields with the farm workers. They're in their nice, safe little offices, and they're not exposed to these horrible chemicals as our farm workers and the consumers are. So that's a battle that we have to continue to wage.
Dolores, I wanted to pick up on what Alice was saying when she said whenever she sees grapes, she thinks of you. I want to ask you to do a couple of things. Can you just bring people, where did you grow up? What was that? And then kind of leap into why Alice is referring to grapes so that we speak about the grape boycott of the 1960s. Can you kind of sweep all that together for us for a moment?
Well, actually, I grew up in Stockton, where Alice is doing this very innovative work there in the high school. That was my hometown. I was born in the state of New Mexico, but came to California when I was 6.5. My mother and my father divorced, and my mother brought us to California. But that was my wonderful upbringing in Stockton, California, which is a town that I still love very much. I had this great, wonderful upbringing, especially because it was such a unique place, as many places in the valley. We had so many ethnic groups where I grew up. I grew up with my African American friends and my Filipino friends, my Japanese and Chinese friends, and the Dust Bowl kids, and so it was just wonderful. And then, of course, coming to Delano, I moved to Delano in 1964, I believe, when we started the Farm Workers Union, and that's, of course, and our plan was to organize for 5 years. And I always like to mention this because when people think about the farm workers strike and the great boycott, and they think, oh, it just happened like overnight. No, we had to organize for 3 years, family by family, house by house, to give the farm workers the courage that they needed to know that they had the power to change their condition. And we had the strike, and we couldn't win with the strikes, and then we had the great boycott. And of course, that's all history. And we can reflect on this now because yesterday was César Chávez's birthday. And so he would have been 93 years old yesterday. And we know that, he gave us that dedication and courage that he had. And to kind of remember him and give us the strength that we need to go on fighting for justice, not only for farm workers, but for all workers.
How many people were involved with that great boycott? That masterminded national great boycott.
And I love to tell that story because often we think, we've got to have 1,000 people to begin a movement. And actually, when we started the union, it was just César, his wife Helen, and myself, the three of us. Then his brother Richard joined us, and his cousin Manuel joined us, and there was 5 of us. So, and then when we were right in the middle of the strike, when we knew we couldn't win because they kept bringing in strike breakers, we knew we had to do something different. And actually, it was an attorney from San Francisco who said, "Have you guys tried to boycott?" And so we did. And so there was a busload of 40 farm workers and young volunteers, and they went to New York City. 40. And I like to say this: 40 farm workers left Delano, went to New York City to start the Great Boycott. And from there, the people dispersed. Some went to Michigan, some went to Texas, some went to Canada, etc. So from 40 farm workers, we got 17 million people not to buy grapes. 17
people
million.
have the power, as Patti Smith would say. I wanted to, there are so many passions and parts of your lives that line up, that you have so much in common. Stockton, for one, all your love of food, but another, Gloria Steinem, also, you have that in common. But both of you taught school and then decided not to teach school and to go another path. And I'm wondering, Dolores, what led you to teaching school and what led you away?
Well, I, as a school teacher, realized that the help that I could give my students and their families was very limited. But realizing that if we could start a union for farm workers, then we could, reach many, many more farm workers than just the few that I was trying to help by getting them an extra lunch ticket or an extra pair of shoes, and having to argue with my principals for these families. Because, back in the day, back in the 50s and the 60s, when people talked about farm workers, they didn't talk about them the way we're talking about them today, with respect. and giving them the dignity that they deserve. Many of the growers up in Sacramento, and during these hearings, they would say, "Oh, we do the public a favor by hiring these people. They're a bunch of winos, alcoholics, they're degenerates that nobody would ever hire." You don't hear the people saying that today. Maybe the attacks against farm workers are more racial now. Because they're attacked because they happen to be Mexicans or Latinos, etc. But back then, it was a very degrading way, the way they talked about farm workers. I think in today's world, and thanks to César's work and so many hundreds of people like Alice, who is here with us
and
today,
yourself.
that really supported the farm workers, and so in today's world, they are more respected than they were then.
And Alice, what led you to teaching? What led you out of the classroom, though you never really left the classroom?
I had a friend who talked about Montessori education, and I was at a real turning point in my life, and I thought, well, maybe I should go to London and take this course. And I went in 1968 to London. Great place to be in 1968. And I learned about her pedagogy and how she was, she was the first female doctor in Italy. And she developed a pedagogy that connected with the stages of development of a child. And her interest was really in the children that she said were sensorially deprived because of poverty and because of hunger. And so she wanted to engage them in a way that sort of opened their minds. And so she had these sort of what she called practical life exercises of the senses. And she would have children smelling and tasting and hearing and touching, and it helped them to see and feel the world around them. And I'm just I have to say that her ideas of the education of the senses and learning by doing have infused everything that I have done since 1968. I didn't realize how important she was, because she saw the sensorial deprivation. She saw that we are living in a world now. I don't know whether she saw that because she died too soon, but I understood that this fast food culture that we're living in is really depriving us of this experience. And those senses are our pathways into our minds. That's the way that we get information, through the sense of touch and smell and taste and visually and hearing. So that is the basis of the Edible Schoolyard Project. I sort of married Montessori with edible education. And I've always thought of the teaching of cooking within the restaurant should be collaborative and very hands-on. I think of all my work in that way. When I'm trying to impress somebody, I bring a bowl of fruit and I put it down on the table because I want them to see the beauty of it, and then we taste it, and we're in a different kind of conversation. I want to win people over. I want them to understand in another dimension, if you will. I'm always kind of burning rosemary in the restaurant so that people smell something when they go in and they say, what's happening here? And maybe it's bread, maybe it's the fire in the fireplace, but it engages people in a different place. And then I feel like we can have the conversation.
Alice, you know, I don't think we've said the name of your restaurant for those who don't know your restaurant and what it is and where it is, and how old it is. Why don't you add that in?
Well, I have to say it's the 40th birthday today of the Cafe of Chez Panisse, which is the upstairs part of the restaurant that we built in 1981. It's the 40th year, but we're headed to the 50th year of Chez Panisse. We started it in August of 1971.
I remember the song Alice Waters Restaurant.
I called the restaurant Chez Panisse because I saw the films of Marcel Pagnol from the 30s, the French films, and they were about a sense of camaraderie that I just loved. I cried, I laughed, I said I want to live in a Pagnol world. And the older man in the Pagnol trilogy was named Panisse, and it's also the name of a little chickpea fried cake. And I said, that's perfect, it has a ring to it. And then I named my daughter Fanny after the heroine in the Pagnol trilogy as well. But Pagnol has also been a big influence on my life. He talked about the abandonment of the land, people moving into the city and losing their values, their sense of belonging to each other, and it really rings true today. Those films are profound. Every child in France actually has to read Pagnol in grammar school. The chateau of my mother and the glory of my father.
You know, I think what you said about food is so important. I know with Dolores Huerta Foundation, we have 9 chapters of our foundation, and we have a monthly meeting every month, a general meeting. Of course, they're suspended now, but and we have food at every meeting. At the end of every meeting, we have food. So our food budget in our organization is quite large, you know. But in what you were saying about Montessori, you know, of the emotional part of it by the touching. And I'm just wondering if maybe that's what organizing is also, because when you're organizing people in the way that we organize it, and I have to mention Fred Ross Sr., you know, he was from the Bay Area, and he's the one that taught us all how to organize. And so when we're organizing, we really try to touch people's emotions, because and the emotion that we're trying to reach them is to make them understand that they have power. And once that they can understand that, but the only way that we can make them understand that is if we give them examples of people that look like them, now people that are low income, many of them immigrants, but people that look like them have been able to accomplish great improvements in their communities. And once they see that and they capture that, then there's that emotion. And I love what you said about Montessori, learning by doing. And because oftentimes people say, well, we have to have a workshop, or we have to have a class on leadership. Well, in my experience, is that people learn leadership by doing, by getting out there, going to your local public city council or school board, like we do with in our education program. Having parents go to the school board, having them confront them and recommend improvements like they do now. And when they see that actually those improvements are implemented, then they gives them that sense of their power and their sense of leadership. And even though many of the people that we organize, like César Chávez, who only went to the 8th grade, they never had a chance to go to high school or go to college, but they do understand that they have the power to make changes in their community. And I'm just wondering if there's a connection there with the whole Montessori movement.
Absolutely. When you were talking, I remembered that during the Bob Scheer campaign, when he was running for Congress on an anti-war platform, and I would go down to Oakland by myself, and I would go up and knock on the doors of the people and say that I wanted to talk to them about Bob Scheer and the anti-war movement. And it really educated me. I had no idea, who I would confront. I was shocked and pleased, and it made me know who was living in those houses and the circumstances. I'll never forget that. But we need to just do it. And it's what I admire so much about you, is just doing it. Get out there and do it. Plant that garden. Just make it happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned going door to door, because that's another big project, and I know that now that we're all homebound and sheltered, but hopefully this virus will be gone by October, November, because we're going to be having elections that are going to be coming up, and we will be doing that exactly with our civic engagement program. Excuse me, going door to door and asking everybody to help us also to get the vote up for the elections. And then we have an initiative that we just gathered signatures for. It's called Schools and Communities First, and it's going to be on the November ballot, and that will bring in $12 billion into our school systems here in California. And hopefully, and a lot of that initiative will be to have the local people and local organizations be able to talk about how that money will be used, how that money will be implemented. And I think that we'll have to make sure that we have the school gardens and make that part of that initiative when it's passed. So we will be asking everybody out there to help us to vote for Schools and Communities First. That'll be on the November ballot.
Great.
I was looking at both of your foundation's website, Dolores Huerta Foundation and the Edible Schoolyard Foundation website, and I was noticing how much curriculum is on both. And I was thinking, in this moment in time when everyone is sheltered, when children are home, when they're being homeschooled, when their parents are involved with this, I was thinking of both of your sites as such a resource for families, and what you might tell people to go look for there right now in this uncharted moment.
Well, cooking with your children is something really, really great, because children are so interested in being able to make something, the simplest thing. Cooking an egg in the morning, just having that, experience of being at the stove, doing it by themselves, cracking that egg, whisking it if you want to have scrambled eggs. But it's the simplest thing, and it has a very big impact if they feel empowered. And there's lots on our website about different things to cook that we know kids love, that are easy to do, that are affordable. And I think that together, I mean, cooking greens, making beans, I mean, they're so nourishing as well. They're just kind of a staple. Make them at the beginning of the week and they last for a long time.
Alice, what's your website there for the Edible Schoolyard Foundation? Yeah, okay, people, you know how to find it. Dolores, what about you? The Dolores Huerta Foundation is just chock-a-block full of community and do you want to add something else?
No, I just wanted to say it's edibleschoolyard.org.
Well, we want to definitely partner up with you, Alice, because another thing that a lot of people don't know is that starting with Governor Jerry Brown and continuing with Governor Gavin Newsom, right now, every school district in California, guess what? They get extra money for low-income children, for foster children, and for English learners. But as part of them getting that extra money, guess what? They have to take recommendations from parents and students, okay? It's called the Local Control Funding Formula. And every year, they have to have a community open forum where people can make recommendations. And I can see that this is a way that we can get the Edible Schoolyard in as many schools as possible. So we definitely will promote that on our end, and I think that we should promote that, throughout the state of California, because I know so many people would love to follow your model and, with your direction, that we can make this happen. So like you said before, right now we're all sheltered, but we can do all of this great work right now through our social media, through the internet, and get this information out to everyone. So in some respects, we can take advantage. For myself, I'm so happy I don't have to be traveling, catching planes and everything.
And Dolores, on your site, if parents wanted to bring the children into your world and sort of all the history and the information, and what is there? Are there resources there for parents and kids right now?
Oh, actually, we are later on today, or tomorrow, rather, I'm going to be getting on a webinar, and we are going to have a curriculum around the Dolores Huerta Day that teachers from the California Teachers Association, they've been working on this curriculum now for several months, and we will be finalizing that, and that will be put out. And it was actually contacting school districts right now, especially since people are doing this online learning and online teaching, to include in the Dolores Huerta Foundation curriculum in their teaching. And so, but Alice, we're going to include the Edible Schoolyard as part of our curriculum, okay? So
and likewise, we have to include your curriculum in our edible education. Truly.
Right. Yeah, because I think it's a great opportunity to get the word out.
I think the table is the place of equality. That if we have children seated at the table, eating together, all together, every lunchtime, not standing in a line, picking up food, dumping half of it in the garbage, wasting it, but sitting down. And I've imagined that school lunch could even be connected to the academic curriculum. So if you're studying, for instance, the geography of the Arabian Peninsula, maybe you're eating the food of that place at lunchtime, having hummus and a pita bread or a tabbouleh salad and a spicy carrot soup, and so that you're digesting the cultures of the world as an everyday experience.
I mentioned earlier about growing up in Stockton and how fortunate I was because part of growing up with all of my different friends who were immigrants from different countries is that I learned to eat with chopsticks when I was 7 years old. And, we ate our Filipino food, the adobo, and all of the different foods from all of our different friends, even the families from Mexico. I grew up in New Mexico, so their food was a little bit different than our food. Just growing up with all these different cultures, and it was so connecting. And I feel sorry for people that don't have this experience, that they don't have friends or didn't grow up with people from different countries, because I think that they've been deprived. In fact, when someone asked me once about our president, they said, "What would you say to President Trump?" And I said, I feel sorry for him, because he obviously didn't have the great opportunity that I had in Stockton, California, growing up with all of my friends, And I think he had a very insular world where he didn't have a lot of friends from different cultures, and also he never had the opportunity to work in a garden and to work in a field, but I think that's something that everybody needs. And the Alice Waters world it just opens up everyone to be able to make that connection with food, which is such an essential part of our lives. You might say it's the basic part of our lives, right? Because if we can't eat, we can't live. And if we can't eat good food, then of course we damage our bodies instead of healing our bodies and making them healthy.
And it makes me think of the garden that Michelle Obama planted.
Mm-hmm.
And she planted it with children at the White House. And that image went around the world. And it also caused people to plant their own gardens. There was a big run on seeds after she planted that garden. So I've always thought that the powers that be, and when they're speaking this language like you're speaking, it really influences people to do it, themselves. And it's, even if it's not exactly happening, we need to imagine that it could happen.
And we could make it happen.
And make it happen. Exactly.
Well, speaking of the Obamas, both of you, both Dolores Huerta and Alice Waters were given, Dolores, you were given the Medal of Honor by President Barack Obama. Alice, you received the National Medal of Arts and Humanities. And Dolores, I'm going to play a little clip from this extraordinary documentary that's been made about you by Peter Bratt and produced in collaboration with Carlos Santana and Benjamin Bratt from Independent Lens. It was shown on PBS. I want to run a clip from that film, but first, Dolores, to set it up, I wonder if you could explain si se puede. I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about now. Where that term came from, what it means, how it came to be.
Well, I think it's a very strong a saying, because it means the collective I can, and in the collective we can. In Spanish, it means both things. In English, you have to say it separately. You say I can. In fact, my young son, Ricky, my youngest son, he says, "Mom, you're not an icon, you're an I can." And so, si se puede, si se puede means I can. It also means we can, working together. I think that's why it's such a powerful slogan. And it actually happened in Arizona after Cesar had done he was in the middle of a 25-day water-only fast. And I was trying to get some of our professionals, Latinos, to come and support Cesar. There was a lot of fear there in Arizona. And they said to me, "No, you can't do that in Arizona. In California, you can do all those things, but in Arizona, no se puede. No, you can't." And my response to them was, "Yes, we can. Si se puede." And that's where it came from. So I say it kind of came from the universe. So that's where it started in Arizona in 1972.
And why was Cesar on a 25-day all-water fast? What led to the fast?
Well, he was fasting because they had passed a law in Arizona that if anybody went on strike, they could go to prison. If anybody said, "Huelga, boycott," huelga means strike, but if anybody said boycott or tried to boycott anything, that they could also go to prison. And if the law was eventually thrown out by the Arizona Supreme Court, but at that time they had passed that law, and Cesar was protesting. And actually, his fast was about taking the fear out of the heart of the growers, so that they wouldn't be afraid of the farm workers, and that they would see farm workers as their partners, and not to, because Cesar's fast always had a purpose. His first one was for nonviolence, which he did in Delano in 1968. The one in Arizona in 1972 was, as I mentioned, so that people would not be afraid of each other. And then the last one that he did, his 36-day fast, was against pesticides and to make our food safe. And those were his 3 fasts. As we celebrated Cesar's birthday yesterday, we remember.
Well, let's take a moment and let's go to a clip. So this is the moment at the ceremony. Oh, I will add this. Dolores received the National Medal of Honor the same year as Bob Dylan. Is that right?
Well, it was actually Medal of Freedom.
Medal of Freedom, my apologies, Medal of Freedom. And Alice, you received the Medal of Arts and Humanities the same year, amongst others, as Stephen King, along with a roster of others. Anyway, just to mark us in time.
The other person, Toni Morrison, received it when I did Bob Dylan, and the granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Juliet Lowe, the founder of the Girl Scouts, okay? And I want to throw that in because I was a Girl Scout for 10 years of my life, from the time I was 8 to the time I was 18. Oh,
I was
awesome.
too.
All right.
I was too. All right. Okay, let's roll.
When people in Arizona said, they told me, no, Dolores, no se puede. You can't do this in Arizona, only in California. My response to them was, sí se puede.
Hers was the rallying cry that would later come to define the presidential campaign of candidate Barack Obama.
Yes, we can.
Have you heard President Obama say, yes, we can? It came from César Chávez, sí se puede.
Dolores Huerta came up with the slogan, Si se puede, and we all attribute that to César Chávez, even Barack Obama. Of course, when he gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he had to correct himself.
On a personal note, Dolores was very gracious when I told her I had stolen her slogan, Si se puede, yes we can. Knowing her, I'm pleased that she let me off easy, because Dolores does not play.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
For both of you to have received these national medals. I'm going to take a moment and just show one more clip from your film, Dolores. And we're just cutting in a few moments into the opening title sequence. It's just riveting, this documentary. It's called Dolores. Let's just, for the sheer joy, pleasure, and knowledge of it, we'll roll clip 1 now.
While the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was leading the charge in the South, one California woman was fighting on the front lines for workers' rights. And while her name's rarely mentioned in the history books, she may just be the most vocal activist you've never heard of.
Come on up, brothers. We are waiting for you.
Dolores Huerta helped lead a worldwide grape boycott that forced growers to agree to some of the country's first farm worker contracts.
She's the first general that I followed into war.
The workers are on the rise.
Dolores Huerta, who is an old friend of mine.
What she is, she's an insult to the farm worker.
Why are the growers and the Teamsters so against her?
Because they're threatened.
We've never given up.
Dolores is an icon.
Dolores Huerta has said Republicans hate Latinos.
She also writes, the alternative to capitalism is democratic socialism.
She's not afraid to speak truth to power.
She's a clown. We thank you for all you have done and all you still do to promote the dignity and human rights of America's family.
She's a civil rights hero.
She's been beaten up and she's gone to jail.
She's a very volatile individual.
We always like to say that we didn't cross the border crossed us.
The FBI knew how dangerous Dolores was.
Conservatives on the Texas Board of Education removed the legendary farm worker organizer Dolores Huerta from the state social studies curriculum.
I gotta tell you, I never heard of this woman.
We really gotta set the record straight. I mean, women cannot be written out of history.
A lot of dancing in there.
A lot of dancing. I heard you say in an interview that had you not gone the path of being an organizer, a labor organizer, political organizer, that the work you would have done would have been a dancer.
Well, I wanted to be a dancer. That was my goal since I was a little kid, because I loved especially the flamenco dancing. As I mentioned, I was born in New Mexico, and so I was exposed to the flamenco music and the flamenco dancing as a young child, and I was just enamored with it. But actually, my teacher who was teaching me flamenco in Stockton, she went to dance with Jose Greco, the famous flamenco dancer. And at the time, I was only I think 18 years old, or 17, and I felt that I was not ready yet to go with her to join. And so I lost my teacher, and then I became a teacher in the classroom, and then that's where I was at when I met Fred Ross, and I learned about organizing. And having grown up again like a lot of us in Stockton at that time, and like kids today, kids of color, the constant harassment by the police, the discrimination that we received in school, and you just build up all of that anger. And then you want to find, you don't know how to, what's the outlet for the anger? And once I learned about organizing, I thought, oh boy, this is it. This is how we can change things. We can make things different. So I became enamored with organizing.
Another thing that I found in that documentary, they talk about the moment when you decided to leave Stockton and move to Delano and become an organizer, a full-time organizer with the Farm Workers Union, you and César starting it. And one of the last things you did before leaving Stockton, do you know the moment I'm talking about?
Yeah, I went to the Monterey Jazz Festival because my other love, of course, is jazz. And growing up and so close to San Francisco as a youngster, that was every weekend we were in San Francisco, going to the Fillmore District, going to the all-night jam sessions, and I was so fortunate because I was able to see so many of the great singers like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday. Was able to meet Charlie Parker, who was still my favorite musician, and Dizzy, and all of the greats. And the other thing is that they would come through Stockton on the way to San Francisco, so we were really exposed to all of the big bands, and so that was my love. And of course, that was what I had to give up when I came to Delano, California, because there was nothing like that in Delano. And it wasn't until I reconnected with jazz when I went to New York City to start the Great Boycott, because there I was fortunate to meet a minister, a Lutheran minister, who was actually a jazz minister. And so I would go with him and accompany him, and we would go down to Harlem. And because he ministered to the jazz community, he was able to get into all of these clubs for free without having to pay anything. And I was able to reconnect with jazz then. But it's still a great part of my life. We have in Bakersfield, we actually have a jazz workshop. And so every Tuesday night, jazz musicians get together in Bakersfield, California. And they have, and also students from the two colleges, Bakersfield College and Cal State Bakersfield, they have jazz studies at both colleges. And then we have visiting musicians that come from the Bay Area, from Los Angeles, that come and play. So I'm able to get my jazz fix, you might say, every Tuesday night. Of course, it's suspended now for this crisis that we're living through, but that is. And then, of course, I hear it on radio any chance that I can. Jazz is definitely one of my most favorite way of my form of entertainment.
And Alice, what about you? What's your path not taken?
The path not taken?
For Alice, if yours is dancing, I wonder, being a flamenco dancer, Alice, if you have a path not taken.
Never thought of that. Never thought of that. Maybe I have, fantasized about architecture, because food and architecture go together for me. What does the room feel like? And I'm just so inspired by dramatic spaces like the Pantheon in Rome. I just go to that place and it changes the way I feel about the world. And to have rain coming in the circle from the ceiling, I mean, it's every time it affects me in that all place. And so I think we have to build buildings that help to teach the values of humanity. And very often the spaces that we are asked to eat in and to live in are not considering nature, are not considering cooking and eating together. And it's so important that we bring nature inside, and that all the buildings that I love around the world, they make that connection. They really do. But I just have to say that we have a great jazz station in San Francisco, KCSM, that is streamed without advertisements around the world. So when I'm traveling sometimes in France, I can just turn it on and listen to Miles Davis or whatever they're playing. And it's just all day, all night. And I can hardly believe that it's available, right now.
The power of public radio.
Pardon me?
It's the power of public radio. That's why there are those commercials. As we've been talking, questions have been coming in, and people knowing that you all were going to be in conversation. So before we close, I'm going to bring the audience in with us. It's a big change from jazz and flamenco, but it's where we are in the world right now. The first one is, how can we as customers do a better job of protecting our agriculture and food service workers from COVID-19 and unfair labor practices? I wonder, Dolores, if you want to take that one. How can we as customers do a better job of protecting our agriculture and food service workers from COVID-19 and unfair labor practices?
Well, I think, trying to reach out to those farmers and the growers, and it's their responsibility to make sure the workers are safe. As I said before, the workers are still working. They're part of our frontline defense, and they're out there to make sure that they have the distancing that they need. When they're out in the field, sometimes they can make that happen, and some crops, so they could keep the workers far apart. It's a matter of just doing the social distancing, practicing. I think it's a little bit harder when they work in the packing sheds and some of the other places where they have to work closer together. But it would be wonderful if they could make the medical services available to them. As I mentioned early on when we started the conversation, that we're very, very concerned that a lot of these workers are not going to be able to get the services, because all of the money that's coming from the federal government, the stimulus money, is not going to be available to the undocumented workers because they're not covered under any of the federal grants. So we're very, very dependent on our governor, Gavin Newsom, with the state funding that's going to be made available to make it, and this is part of our End Child Poverty program that we're doing with the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and the End Child Poverty, the Daughters of Charity are the leaders in this effort to make sure that all of that, the state monies are available to the undocumented population, and especially our children of these undocumented populations who are right now, as we speak, are part of the children that are in deep poverty in our state, and something that shouldn't be. And when we think of agriculture as one of our big industrial incomes that we have, the money in agriculture is huge, and yet it doesn't trickle down to the families. So if people can just send an email to Governor Gavin Newsom and just say, please don't forget the undocumented population, especially our farm workers, because this is one great way that people can support them immediately.
I also wanted to add, those of you who bought tickets for this event, you know that tonight is a benefit. Tonight at the Sidney Goldstein was to be a benefit for the Dolores Huerta Foundation and Alice's Edible Schoolyard Foundation. And it still is that benefit. And anyone who would like to contribute to their foundations, if you go to the City Arts and Lectures website, and you can make a donation to this program, and all those monies will go to the work of both these extraordinary women and the great teams of people that do that work alongside them. Here's another question too. What is the most expedient way for organizers to create partnerships between communities, local farmers, and feed the frontline groups like World Central Kitchen? Do you want to wrestle with that one too, Dolores? Alice?
Well, I was just going to say, by just doing that, really finding the people, the farmers and the producers online, and finding the people in need and putting them in touch with each other. I'm trying to do that within our Edible Schoolyard and Chez Panisse world, trying to put out the places around the country that are growing food and nourishing food and taking care of the land, and so that people can call and make that connection. It's something that I think we have to do community by community, because it's very hard to organize that, across the country or even in the States. I think it needs to come with making those connections with like-minded organizations and having, a goal together.
I wanted to mention the fact that Chef Jose Andres was on the cover of Time magazine this week. And when we think about how he's organizing the whole world by feeding them, it's also a wonderful example. He's a very humble person, very energetic, as we know. I was fortunate to be with him in Washington, D.C., and was just amazed by the energy that he has. He had just flown in from the Bahamas, where he was feeding people, that had been hit by the hurricane. We did a presentation at the George Washington University, and then he flew back to the Bahamas back the next day, kind of without stopping, and I was just amazed at how much energy he has, and I was really happy, again, talking about food and how essential that is, and the way that we can use food to organize, and the way that we use food to heal, and he, like you, Alice, is spreading that message throughout the world.
I'm going to take two more questions. What is the most important policy that California could pursue in the immediate future for assuring sustainable agriculture, especially small local farms?
Well, I think what I believe is that the school system needs to be that economic engine for the small organic farms up and down the state, who take care of the land and take care of their farm workers. That should be a big part of this. And I hope when we get to the detail of it, that Dolores can help to write the right language into that bill. But I can't think of a better way to really kickstart this whole movement.
And I would like to add too, because when you talk to farm workers, they are really proud of what they do. They care about the plants. They feel that they have a profession. People don't realize that. But if one of us was taken out to a vineyard right now and told, okay, we want you to prune this vine, we wouldn't know how to do that, because you have to prune the vine in a way that it will produce the best amount of the best bunches of grapes, okay? And if you're not schooled in that, if you don't know how to do that, you're not going to do it. I mean, you're going to damage the vine, and it's not going to produce the fruit that you want. So when we think of farm work and the work that the workers do, think of it as a profession, and that's why they need to be respected as people that love the work that they do. And the other thing is, because farm work has been denigrated so much, and of course it was purposeful. They did this so that they could abuse the workers, so that they wouldn't have to pay them the kind of wages that they deserve. And as we get more people young people into farming, I've often thought that we should have an agri-corps. Just like they have job corps for kids in the cities. Yeah, bring kids out into the fields. A lot of the farm worker children, they go, the people that we deal with, the kids have always worked in the fields, but a lot of times they're discriminated against because they would prefer to bring in foreign workers, H-2A workers, that they don't have to pay them as much. They don't have to pay them Social Security, unemployment insurance. And so our local farm workers, kids are actually discriminated by the local growers. But this is something that I hope to take up with Governor Newsom right after this crisis is over. I know that Governor Jerry Brown and I had talked about it. He thought it was a great idea. So we have in the Central Valley, where they talk about, I know everybody's unemployed right now, but when they talk about the unemployment figures being at 3% or 4%, here in our area, unemployment is 9%. And many of the kids that are coming out of school, they really don't have jobs. But if we could start an agri-corps and then kind of connect that with some kind of funding where they could get whatever wages they make could be matched with monies. And I think they did have this program many years ago. And so if a youngster, they earn $2,000, they could get a matching $2,000 into their savings account. And then that money could go for college, or the money could go later on to buy a home or to start a business, whatever. But it's something that we could do very creatively, and to get more people back into the fields, more people back into agriculture. And of course, keep fighting to make sure that they get a living wage for the work that they do. And not just the minimum wage that they can barely live on.
Well, we're starting an institution for edible education at the University of California at Davis. And we're going to build this institute to be able to teach both about agriculture and about food, and really hope to do a lot of the training so that we can have people that are very skilled who are farm workers and can talk about that and pass on that to the young people who come to the Institute. I think we're about 3 or 4 years from completing it, but I get to design it. And I hope you'll come and teach there, Dolores.
I would love that. We're definitely going to partner up, and we're going to make sure that we grow the Edible Schoolyard, and we do it as fast as possible in as many ways as we can. Right now, our foundation, we're active actually in 14 different school districts, okay, with the work that we've been doing on the local control funding formula, and getting recommendations. We did a huge campaign to get more teachers and counselors. We even used lawn signs. We put lawn signs out into the community, and we had petitions so that we could get more counselors and more teachers into our classroom. So this is part of our ongoing work that we do with our education department, where we have some brilliant young people that are leading that department. But definitely we're going to partner up with the Edible Schoolyard and recommend that to as many school districts as we can. Si se puede.
I love it. Well, speaking of young people, you both have children. Dolores, how many children do you have?
Well, I had 11 children. When my oldest daughter passed away, unfortunately, but I still have 10. Of course, all my children are grown now, but I have, I believe, 18 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren.
Cool.
I love it. I love, there's a quote I read of yours where you say, I want to say to mothers out there, take your children to marches, take them to meetings, because this is a way that they can become strong and they understand what politics is all about, and because they're actually living it.
And they get a sense of power. You know, they get a sense of power when they're with other people and they're marching or they're in a meeting. And sometimes we think kids don't learn, but it's amazing. Even if they're running in and out of a meeting, whatever, they pick up so much information. It always amazes me. My kids, when they were little, I remember once one of my daughters, Juanita, who became a school teacher, and she was on her play telephone after one of our training sessions, and I said to her, what are you doing, Juanita? She says, I'm calling the people. I said, for what? She says, to come and leaflet. Oh, I said, are you going to ask them to picket? She said, no, they're not ready to picket yet. They're just going to leaflet. This is like my 4-year-old daughter saying this on her play telephone.
So great.
I love that. Well, Alice, your daughter has a book coming out this very, I don't know, is it this very day, right around now, that is called Always Home, that is this memoir of her life and you and cooking. So maybe she wasn't picking up the telephone and saying leaflet, but she was picking up the frying pan and...
She was picking the strawberries in the backyard garden when she was very, very little. And she's a real sensual writer. I mean, that she writes in a way that you can taste it and smell it and see it. And it's very, she has the words, and I just love the way that she has made her life in nature. She's inspired by nature, and it's because she's been out there in it. And it's, again, learning by doing. And she's very strong-willed and an activist in that place, too. In that cooking place, she knows that she can really reach her friends that way.
Well, I'm very lucky because I do have a chef in my family also. His name is Vincent, and he's been doing a lot of experimenting with cactus. Unfortunately, he got into real estate, but he still loves to cook, and he's a Jehovah's Witness. So when they put up their churches, he does cooking. He cooks like for 400 people at the same time. And then I have my oldest son Fidel is a doctor. And he's a doctor for special needs children in Kern County for the Kern Regional Center. My daughter Angela is an oncology nurse now. She used to be an ER nurse. And my daughter Maria Elena, she's a director of a YWCA center in Los Angeles. And I could go on and on. But I'm very fortunate. And I like to say that to all mothers out there, that, when your kids are active, they just become very resourceful. My children grew very, very poor in the farm worker movement because we didn't get wages. We got stipends, but they were in the movement, and they just learned so much. And I forgot my son Emilio, who's an attorney, one of my sons. And so my kids they've done very well, and a couple of my daughters, like my daughter Lori, who was helping us with this Zoom this morning, she works for our foundation and Camila, my youngest, she's the executive director of our foundation, and she graduated from Olds College, and her major was in learning about children. So we have a good group of people that are really great. And I forgot my daughter Alicia also. I think that's about all of them. I probably forgot some in there. Okay.
I want to thank you both so much for being part of this morning, for sharing your lives and your wisdom. Dolores, any notes, any words you want to close on before we?
Well, just again, I would like to remind people about the census that, and especially if you know people in the hard-to-count communities, to call them, tell them not to be afraid. The census is confidential. The information cannot be shared with ICE or any immigration services. If anybody tries to share the information, they can go to prison for 5 years or get a $250,000 fine. And it's really important because if people do not fill the census, then we're going to not have the representation that we need, the political representation, but also each one of us that gets counted, we bring in thousands of dollars into our community. Over a 10-year period, it could be as much as $20,000. And we know that money for schools, for healthcare, for infrastructure. And so it's a very, very serious thing that we fill out. We fill out our census forms, and it's been extended now, I think, till the end of July. But please, especially people that are listening, people that you know, people that are undocumented, tell them not to be afraid. Please fill out the census. We need it.
Amen.
All right. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Thank you, Dolores. Thank you, Alice, for getting out of your sweatpants and heeding this call. City Arts and Lectures is making as many of their scheduled programs free and available online, and they'll continue weekly till they go back on stage live at the Sydney. Next week on Thursday, April 9th, is a program with two extraordinary fiction writers, Namwali Serpel and Carmen Maria Machado. And the week after that, on Friday, April 17th, we will be remembering the great Dr. Oliver Sacks with Temple Grandin and others. Stay safe, stay in, lay low, but lay deep. Support one another and your communities. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Sí se puede.